Okay, in this section, we are going to talk about the nucleus. Now, if you think of the cell as a company or a city, sometimes we think of it that way, the nucleus is City Hall or the boss. It is the thing that tells the rest of the cell what to do and when to do it. And that is because the nucleus has the DNA. So the nucleus is going to be the largest part of almost every cell. There are a few oddballs where it's not, but it's usually the thing that is largest, and it's almost always visible in cells that have a nucleus. The DNA is in strands. Remember, we call those chromosomes, and the DNA carries the instructions for making proteins, and those proteins are going to be able to make everything else the cell needs. So DNA are the master copy of the instructions for making everything in the cell and doing everything that the cell needs to do. Within the nucleus, there is a smaller structure called the nucleolus, and this structure is going to make the ribosomes. Okay, now remember, the ribosomes make proteins, but they do that with the instructions from the DNA. So in order to make a protein, you first have to make a ribosome. That happens in the nucleus. Then you get the instructions from a chromosome, give those to the ribosome that you made, and then the ribosome makes the protein. We will talk more about this later. Don't worry if that didn't quite make sense. We will talk a lot about it later in the semester. Just know the nucleolus is made in the nucleolus is inside the nucleus, and it makes the ribosomes. Now, DNA itself in chromosomes is not just a single DNA double helix. So this is the DNA molecule. We call it a double helix. The helix means it's a twisted spiral. And it's double because there are actually two lines here that are twisted around each other. The DNA is actually packaged in a very specific way so that different parts of the DNA can be easily accessed when those proteins need to be made. So in order to do that, we have proteins. So the instructions for making proteins is on the DNA, and then some of those proteins are used to wrap up the DNA to keep it organized so that it can be used to make more proteins. Isn't that wild? It's a little bit confusing, but just remember the DNA is the instructions, okay? So these specific proteins, there are little groups of them, and then the DNA strand wraps around that. And the DNA plus the proteins is called a substance called chromatin, okay? So each chromosome is a big, long strand of DNA wrapped up around proteins. So the chromosome is made out of chromatin, and the chromatin is the DNA and all the proteins that keep the DNA organized. Okay, so we got chromosome made up of chromatin, made up of DNA and proteins. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the nucleus is a really cool structure. It actually has a double membrane. So the pink part here is the nucleus, and you can see there's an outer layer here and then an inner layer. So you're gonna hear phospholipid bilayer a lot. This has a double phospholipid bilayer. We're gonna get to the phospholipid bilayer in just a minute. They also have these really special holes in the nucleus that are called nuclear pores. A pore is just a hole, right? Like pores in your skin. And these nuclear pores are surrounded by protein molecules that can control what goes in and out of the nucleus. And this is really important because the DNA, which is the master set of instructions for how to make everything in the cell, that DNA needs to stay inside the cell. It cannot be allowed to go, or inside the nucleus. It cannot be allowed to go out into the cytoplasm. When we make a protein, we make a copy of the DNA in a molecule called RNA. And that RNA needs to leave the nucleus and go out into the cytoplasm. And so the nuclear pores are going to keep the DNA in the nucleus and allow the RNA to leave the nucleus. So the way that things happen in the cell is that the DNA is going to be copied into RNA. Okay, it's a very similar molecule. Again, we'll talk about it later in the semester. We call this process transcription. So the DNA is transcribed into RNA. That RNA then leaves the nucleus, binds with a ribosome, and the ribosome takes those instructions and uses that to make a protein. And then the protein, those are the molecules that are going to be really important in making stuff in a cell. Some of them are literal machines, little molecular machines that can move or can make a bond, make a larger molecule, or break molecules. So the way that your body breaks down foods is with little protein molecules that break things into smaller pieces. Proteins are often also messenger molecules that send a signal from one place to another to say, like, hey, we need more of this, or hey, we need this protein, or hey, stop doing that. Okay, so there's a lot of things that go on. Like I said, the cell is a very, very complex structure. Okay, so we've got the nucleus. It has a double membrane. It's usually the largest part of the cell. It's usually the most visible part of the cell. It contains DNA in strands, in linear pieces called chromosomes. Those chromosomes are made up of chromatin, which is a substance that is made up of DNA and the proteins that keep it organized. All right, in the next section, we're going to talk about the plasma membrane.